thank you everyone for taking time out of your day for joining us for today's really important presentation, the NeedyMeds special topic webinar, Samaritans, Suicide Prevention. My name is Carla. I am the Education Coordinator at NeedyMeds. And before we get started with today's presentation, I want to go over just a few what I call housekeeping tips. You can feel free to type any questions you may have into the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel, which is in and should remain on your desktop. If it's in your way, you can feel free to put your mouse over it and drag it to the corner. I will let you know that if we don't have time to answer all of the questions at the end of the webinar, we will follow up with you personally via email after the webinar within about a day. Please know, of course, if your question is more urgent than that, at the end of both of our PowerPoint presentations, you will find contact information, including a phone number and a website for you to reach out to immediately. Also want you to know that we are recording this webinar, and actually hang on one second and let me make sure I am doing that. Yes, we are recording this webinar, and we do that so that we can convert it into a video and post it on the NeedyMeds YouTube page, and that usually takes us a few days, so it'll be up there by the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. For those of you that are not familiar with NeedyMeds, we are a national nonprofit, and there's our mission statement up on your screen right now. We are dedicated to educating and empowering those seeking affordable health care. And we really define the education portion of our website in two ways. Certainly by educating people about NeedyMeds and the resources we have to offer, but also letting them know other resources and information about important topics, which is why we are so pleased to have a representative from Samaritans with us today. Samaritans' mission is to reduce the incidence of suicide by alleviating despair, isolation, distress, and suicidal feelings. In this webinar, you will learn about risk factors and warning signs for suicide, how to talk to someone who may be suicidal, and basic steps in getting a suicidal person help. Today, Rose Chayette will be walking us through this information. Rose is the coordinator for community education and outreach with Samaritans Inc. of Boston. In this position, she teaches suicide prevention workshops to youth, adults, and elders throughout the greater Boston area. Prior to this position, Rose spent 2 years answering calls and texts on the Samaritan helpline. One of the things I do want to stress, and Rose, you can talk a bit about this if it's not addressed, although you hear me talking about that Samaritans is located in Boston and Rose has focused some of her workshops in the greater Boston area, Samaritans is a national organization. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass the screen and the mic to Rose. So bear with us while we make that transition. You may hear silence in the meantime. And with that, let me go ahead and see if you can grab that screen for me, Rose, and then when you're ready, you can take over. Thanks, everybody, for your patience.
Hi there. I'm just going to get my PowerPoint up there.
Perfect. I can hear you clearly, Rose, and your screen looks great. Go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Carla, and thank you so much to NeedyMeds for inviting me to do this. Like Carla said, I am calling in from Boston today. I know we have people probably from all over the country, which is great. And like Carla said, though we do base a lot of our work in Boston, we are, we have resources that can be accessed wherever you are, all across the country. So here are some of our objectives for the day, and for the webinar rather. And I do want to say that obviously talking about suicide, talking about things like depression and mental illness, it can be really challenging sometimes, and we're going to be talking about suicide, really openly and honestly today. So I want to just make sure that people realize that that can be triggering sometimes, and that can be challenging, and that's okay. And if at any point during this next hour, if you are feeling like this is kind of a lot or this is feeling overwhelming, I think that taking care of yourself is the most important thing. So if that means that you have to leave the webinar and do some self-care to take care of yourself, please do so. If you feel like, gosh, I think I actually am struggling with some of this stuff and I think I need to talk to somebody about it, our 24-hour helpline is at the bottom of every single slide. It's right there. It's 1-877-870-HOPE. That's 1-877-870-4673. So call or text that number if you feel like you need to kind of take a break, step away from the webinar. And like I said, I definitely encourage you to take care of yourself. And we're going to be looking at this topic from the perspective of how do you support somebody at risk for suicide? This could be somebody in your family. This could be a friend. It could be a colleague of yours, maybe somebody at work. It's adaptable. So that's sort of the perspective that we're going to be looking at this topic through. So just to give people sort of an idea of what we do, we have a couple of resources that are based mostly in the greater Boston area, and then we have one resource which is really across the board, and that is our 24-hour helpline, which people can call or they can text. This is a confidential, anonymous, and free number. When people reach out to us, they don't have to share their name, their age, where they live. We don't pull information from people. We just want them to share whatever they are comfortable sharing. And I think that sometimes when people hear about a resource like this or sort of any kind of crisis line, a lot of people have the assumption that to take advantage of that resource, you have to be suicidal or maybe you have to be in some kind of crisis. That's totally fair when people think that. But what I want people to really understand is that you do not have to be suicidal to access a number like ours. You don't have to be in a crisis. In fact, most people that are actually reaching out to us are not suicidal. They're just really looking for someone who will listen to them, somebody who won't, judge them or judge what they're going through, just someone who that they can really open up to. So certainly people reach out to us who are suicidal and who are in a crisis, but it's really just, whatever is going on in life, we want people to know that they can call or text us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have a couple of other resources. We have the prevention, which is what I do. Just having really open and honest conversations about suicide, about mental illness. I think a lot of people are really looking for opportunities to talk about suicide in an open and honest way, but they don't know how to, or they don't know if it's okay. So that's why I talk about it so honestly, is to give people that opportunity to realize that it's okay to talk about, and we should be talking about this as much as we can. And our last program is our grief support services, and that's for people who have lost somebody to suicide, and someone, we call that person a survivor of suicide. Obviously, when a person passes away for any reason, there's so much grief, it's so painful, it's so challenging. And when somebody dies by suicide, the people left behind, those survivors, on top of all of that grief that they're feeling, there's a lot of other complexities there. Sometimes there can be a lot of shame, there can be guilt, there can be confusion. Maybe they saw that person last week and they were smiling, and then now they're gone. So we offer these resources for people who have lost someone to suicide to come together to talk about their grief in an open and honest and a safe way. So through all of our services, we just really don't want people to ever feel like they are alone. That's kind of, what our motto is: you are not alone. So I think it's really important to, know the impact of suicide. It's a topic that's really stigmatized. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of prejudice around suicide. But we should really, I think, understand, how it's affecting people around us. So I'm going to bring up a bunch of these stats. Sorry, they're coming at you one by one. And this will just sort of help us understand a little bit more about its impact. So there were 44,000 suicides in 2015, but I want to say that number is probably low because there might be suicides taking place that actually aren't reported as such, but they were a suicide. So one example would be a drug overdose. Maybe somebody does overdose and it was a suicide, however, it wasn't reported that way. Or sometimes you hear about maybe a single car accident. Maybe it was a suicide, but it wasn't reported that way. So I think that the numbers that we have are just a little bit low in terms of what might actually be going on. It's the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 24 years old. I'm going to move down the list a little bit. The highest suicide rate in 2015 was amongst adults, 45 to 64, and in particular, that was white males. And the second is those 85 years and older. Before I started doing this work, I don't know why, but I really thought that it was young people that were dying by suicide more. And when I share these statistics, I hear a lot of people are often surprised, but it really is those older populations that are dying by suicide more.
And
yes.
Rose, excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think
That's
your
okay.
audio at moments is coming in and out. Sometimes when that happens to me, I just need to readjust my mouthpiece.
Is that better there?
It actually is much better, and I'm sorry to interrupt the presentation, guys. I just wanted to make sure everybody can hear Rose clearly.
That's okay. I'm so sorry. Should I go back a little bit, or are we okay?
I would say just for the last couple of sentences.
Okay. Let's see. What was I just saying? So, I think that when I first started doing this work, I did think that it was younger populations that were dying by suicide more. That's what I thought I heard more when the topic of suicide did come up, but it really is older populations that are dying by suicide more. And, this last statistic there, I find kind of interesting. Men die by suicide at much higher rates than women do. The women actually are attempting suicide more often. And I think there's a number of reasons why that is the way that it is, but one really big one is simply the method in which some people take their life. Specifically, men tend to use more lethal means, such as firearms, whereas women might use something not quite as lethal, maybe pills, maybe cutting, poisoning, something like that. So obviously, someone might be able to survive a self-inflicted gunshot wound, but that doesn't happen very often. So men just tend to die more because they are using those more lethal means. And I think just in terms of society as well, I think that men are often told to sort of man up, quote unquote, man up and show emotion and, don't show any vulnerability, whereas women, it might be a little bit more accepted to kind of ask for help, to show that vulnerability. I think it's so important for people to know that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask for help, and it's actually a sign of strength to ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness. And since I know that people are calling in from all across the country, just in terms of geography, so the darker the color on this map, the more suicides there are in that state. And, there could be a lot of different factors that play into this kind of thing. Isolation, the weather, maybe access to resources. But again, means and methods do play a role again. When I sometimes thought before I started doing this work that if somebody was suicidal, if somebody was going to take their own life, they would just find a way. They would find a way and do it. But that might not actually be the case, because if we can reduce the lethal means that a person has access to, if we can have some protective factors in place, that could prevent suicide. So one example might be actually having a fence up on a bridge. That's a way to prevent suicide. Maybe not having a gun in the house. That could be another way to prevent a suicide. Not having large amounts of pills around. So those are just some sort of protective factors that can be in place that might be able to prevent suicide. There's a lot of myths about suicide, and I think sometimes these myths can prevent us from actually talking about it. I definitely want to highlight this first one up here because a lot of people really do think that if you talk about suicide or if you ask somebody the question, are you feeling suicidal, that could place the idea into someone's head, or that might make somebody start to think, oh, wow, I wasn't thinking about that before. Maybe that's an option for me. It's really not the case, though. You know, just talking about suicide and asking somebody that question, that's actually one of the best ways to prevent suicide because it can really allow someone to realize it's okay to not be okay. It's okay that I'm struggling. It's okay that I'm having these thoughts. And, you know, when we ask people who call in or text into our Samaritans Helpline if they are feeling suicidal, a lot of people really share that they feel so much relief. They're very relieved to be asked that question because nobody was asking them that question, and they just, again, realize, wow, it's okay that I'm not okay. This is a safe thing to talk about and a safe place to talk about it. I also want to highlight this last one here at the bottom. These conversations of you know, talking to somebody who might be suicidal or asking somebody if they're suicidal, I think a lot of people sometimes shy away from it because they think, you know, I'm not a professional. I don't know what to do if somebody says yes, or I don't know how to talk to somebody about this. That's fine. You know, many of us are not professionals. I'm not a mental health professional, but I've had many conversations with people who are suicidal. And on our Samaritans Helpline, we have teenagers that come and volunteer with us and are answering those phone calls and are answering those text messages. You know, they're not mental health professionals, but if you can be a good listener and be compassionate and be empathetic and be open, you know, that's a really great way that you can actually help somebody who's suicidal. Maybe you don't have all the answers. Maybe you're not going to be helping somebody in a long-term kind of way. But, you know, we can still have these conversations with people and try to help people, even if we're not a mental health professional. So those are a couple that I wanted to highlight there. So one thing you might notice, I'm kind of going to look at the last bullet point there. Something that you might have noticed so far in this webinar, I actually haven't used the word commit suicide. I try not to use the phrase commit suicide. And, you know, the word commit, it has some positive connotations. Like police might sometimes use commit as in somebody commits to a relationship or they commit to a cause. But oftentimes it's used in a more negative way, like committing a crime, committing a sin. And one of the things about suicide that makes it pretty complex is that it's really not about wanting to end the life. It's about wanting to end the pain. It's about the pain just feeling so overwhelming for a person that, you know, in that moment, they're so clouded by that pain. And if someone's so clouded by that pain and, you know, they don't know what they want to do, maybe they feel like, I don't want to live, but I don't want to die, and they're sort of in limbo. If they're so clouded by that pain, can they make decisions? Can they make decisions that have intent behind it? Because the word commit has a lot of intent behind it, like you're aware of what you're doing. So people who work in suicide prevention are sort of trying to change the language from saying commit suicide to saying other phrases like somebody died by suicide or somebody took their life or somebody killed themselves. You know, I don't expect anyone to suddenly change their language. Changing our language is really hard. It takes time. But I think it's just important to think about because language can build a stigma, and if we can change the language a bit, maybe we can keep on, you know, working at trying to break down some of that stigma. Okay. So let's talk about risk factors. Risk factors are basically things that might contribute to somebody feeling suicidal. Risk factors, though, are not causes. And I think it's really important to make that distinction because sometimes risk factors are actually presented as causes. One example that I often hear is, and maybe some of you have heard this sometimes as well in the news, where you might hear a story of a boy was being bullied in school, so he took his life. Sometimes it's presented as being very cause and effect. But that's kind of a dangerous narrative, I think, because is everyone who experiences bullying suicidal? No, not at all. Typically what happens is there are multiple things going on that are getting heavier and heavier on a person's shoulders, and maybe they don't have a good support system around them. Maybe they don't have good, healthy coping skills, and oftentimes, too, a mental illness is involved, and with all of those things, sort of boiling over and starting to get heavier and heavier on a person's shoulders, that's a time where somebody might start to feel like, this is too much. How am I expected to deal with all of these things? So it's typically never just one thing. This list here that we have here of some examples of risk factors, obviously this is just a small sample. We could think of a lot more potential risk factors, things that might contribute to somebody feeling suicidal. But again, I want to really reiterate that they are not causes, but they're contributing factors. Sometimes what can happen is the risk factors can sort of slowly build from birth and start to feel more and more overwhelming. Sometimes it can be sort of a perfect storm situation where a few or a number of really hard things happen to a person in a very short amount of time, and that's what starts to make them feel like, I just can't deal with this stuff anymore. This is too much. How am I supposed to deal with these things? And that can lead to somebody presenting some warning signs. I'm going to spend some more time on warning signs here because I think it's so important for people to know what warning signs are. I'm going to sort of use a CPR analogy. We know what the warning signs are if somebody can't breathe or if somebody's choking. They're putting their hands around their neck, or then maybe somebody's passed out and their face is changing color. We don't have to necessarily be a doctor to be able to intervene and perhaps even save their life. We can do the Heimlich, we can do CPR, things like that. We might not be able to save every person, but we have a much better chance of being able to if we know what those warning signs are. And it's the same with suicide. We can't prevent every suicide. We simply can't. But if we know what some of the warning signs are, if we're aware of them and know some of them, maybe we can intervene and help somebody. Maybe we can even save somebody's life if we notice a warning sign and check in with them about it. So that's why it's so important. There usually are warning signs when a person is suicidal. Oftentimes you hear stories of a suicide, and oftentimes you hear people say, there was just no signs. Nobody saw this coming. And maybe nobody did see it coming, and maybe there weren't warning signs, but usually there are. And usually the thing is we don't know what they are, so we don't know how to intervene or don't even know that we should be intervening. So sometimes they're verbal. At the top here we have a few examples of a direct verbal warning sign. Nobody would miss me if I were gone. I'm a burden on everybody. What's the point anymore? I don't want to wake up tomorrow. I want to kill myself. People really do sometimes verbalize those statements, verbalize those warning signs. But oftentimes, they're not actually verbal. Oftentimes, they're changes in behavior, or they're a physical change, or a change in the way they're interacting with people. So a pretty big one is people withdrawing from friends, from family, maybe some activities they used to enjoy or hobbies they used to partake in. Maybe it's their schoolwork is declining or their performance at work seems to be doing worse. Someone could be sleeping all the time, or maybe they're just never sleeping. There's one here that I think is really important to talk about. It's right in the middle. It says sudden mood lift after a down period. So I want to explain what that is. So if there's somebody who operates at kind of a low level, maybe they are clinically depressed, maybe not, but they typically just they're at a low level. They seem kind of down a lot of the time. And then suddenly there's a spike, and they seem happy, and they seem like maybe they're doing better, like they're doing okay. I think for a lot of us, our natural instinct would be, if we saw that, to think, this is great. This person is doing better. They're getting the help that they need. Things are looking up. That could be the case, absolutely. But what it could also signify is that maybe somebody's actually come up with a plan. They have realized, you know what, I am going to end my life. And they're feeling some relief. And they're actually feeling kind of happy because they see a way to get out of that pain. So that could be a pretty big warning sign. Engaging in risky behaviors, that could be driving recklessly, not really caring about the outcome if they're driving recklessly. It could be not listening to their doctor's orders or taking the medications that they're supposed to take, increasing alcohol or drug use, giving away belongings or putting affairs in order. That's one that, you know, we hear about a lot. And that last one there I also want to talk about. People making jokes about suicide. I am guilty of this, and maybe some of you listening will think, oh, I've done this too. You know, maybe you're stuck in traffic for hours and you're like, oh, I was stuck in traffic for 3 hours. Just wanted to kill myself. Oh, I wish somebody would end it for me. I'm so stressed about the traffic. Or, you know, sometimes a lot of kids will hear classmates say things like, oh, I just failed that history test. I want to kill myself. You know, we just kind of joke about suicide kind of casually in our culture. I've said it before. Maybe some of you have said it. We do joke about it pretty casually. And oftentimes it is a joke. You know, oftentimes it's that moment of frustration where we just don't know what else to say, so we make that kind of joke. But, you know, on the flip side of that, sometimes people say things in a sort of jokey or joking way, and they're not actually joking. What they're doing is they're testing the people around them to see, I wonder if anybody's listening. I wonder if anybody is really hearing what I'm saying. So, you know, personally for me, if I heard somebody make a joke about suicide, what I would do is I would pull them aside and I would just say to them, you know, in a private way, not in front of other people, I would just say, you know, hey, I heard that thing that you said before, and I just want to check in with you, and I want to see, you know, are you okay? What's going on? I mean, it might be like, are you serious, Rose? Are you kidding me? It was a joke. You know, get out of here. I might feel embarrassed, kind of stupid for maybe escalating a situation, but you know what? At the end of the day, I would rather take that extra step and check in with someone and kind of wonder about it later on and think, they made that joke. Was there something to it? You know, I'd rather just take that extra step. And I also want to just mention, this happens a lot online sometimes, on Facebook, on other social media sites where people write things sometimes. And I think it's okay to also check in with people on that kind of forum if you see something that worries you. You know, I actually, just an anecdote about myself, I saw somebody write something on Facebook a couple of years ago, and I hadn't spoken to this person in about 8 years, but what they wrote was really kind of jarring and kind of worrying. And I just sent them a private message and said, hey, I know that we haven't spoken in nearly 10 years, but I saw that, you know, what you wrote on your wall, and it worried me, and I want to just check in with you and see if you're okay, and let you know that if you want to talk, I'm here for you. And here's a helpline number if you feel like it'd be easier to talk to someone that you don't know. You know, it just never hurts to check in with someone, take that extra step. So this is, again, the same as the risk factors list. This is just a small sample of what some warning signs can be. If you're looking for more, I definitely encourage you to look online for more warning signs for suicide, because, again, I think it's so important to know what they can be. And I want to mention, too, that it's so hard because a lot of these things on this list, they're not always warning signs. You know, somebody could be giving away belongings just because they're trying to downsize, you know, or somebody could be sleeping a lot lately for some other reason, or withdrawing for some other reason. The only way we can actually know if these are warning signs for suicide is by talking to somebody, by checking in with them. And the last thing I'm going to say about warning signs is that they typically don't happen overnight. Usually these things start to transpire over 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, and just it's a change that you're noticing in someone. There could be someone who sleeps very little, and that's their norm. That's just how they operate, and they're fine. But if there's someone who you know seems pretty awake, and suddenly over 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, they're seeming really exhausted, and you're noticing those changes, that might be a time just to check in with them and see what's going on. Someone who's dealing with thoughts of suicide might be feeling a lot of different things. You know, they might feel depressed. They might feel really confused, not sure what they want to do. They might be feeling isolated, worthless, overwhelmed, helpless, hopeless. You know, there's a lot of complexities to suicide, to suicidal thoughts. They could be feeling a lot of different things. So we're going to do this sort of little exercise, I guess you could call it here. And we're going to look at how events over time can build up for a person to the point of where they actually might be feeling like, I'm drowning. This is too much. So we have a woman here. She's 60 years old currently, and we have some things that happened in her life. So at the age of 30, her mother died. At 35, she started this high-stress job. At 40, she got a divorce. 45, diagnosed with depression. 50, she broke her hip. 55, developed an addiction to painkillers. And at 60, she started to actually have thoughts of suicide. And as each of these things took place, this water is going to come in. And it's going to start getting higher and higher for her, all the way until the end. And at each age, at each age, you know, as the water was going up, I mean, it's getting higher and higher. And this is just designed to show us that, you know, if we're talking to someone or we're supporting someone, there might be things that we're missing. Maybe we don't know the full story. You know, we may see that they're struggling with something, or maybe we know one thing that a person is dealing with, but we may not be aware of the personal story behind the events, or like really how much is filling up on their plate. Obviously, we're all different. We all handle situations differently, but it's just important for us to realize that although we may think it might be like one little thing that someone is going through, to them, that one thing might actually be making them feel like they're drowning. That could really be their breaking point because of everything that's been building up. You know, we can't always see we can't necessarily see people's pain or see people's experiences. We can't judge people. We shouldn't judge people. The most important thing to do is just to listen and try to see how we can support them through hearing their story. So obviously we all cope in different ways. We cope with stress, with pain in different ways. And this might sound kind of silly, but at some point, either right now while you're listening to this webinar or when the webinar ends, I really encourage all of you to write down somewhere, maybe at minimum 3 to 5 things that you do for yourself to cope with stress or cope with pain. You know, I'm sure that, you know, I lead a very busy life. I'm sure many of you lead very busy lives, and sometimes it can be so hard to find the time to take care of ourselves, but especially if you're supporting somebody else, you can't take care of others if you can't take care of yourself. So really important to be aware of what helps you, and even if you're having that crazy busy day, maybe you have to take 15 minutes out of your day to do something that you've written down on your list to help yourself get to a better place, to be able to conquer the rest of the day or conquer your next task. You know, when I do workshops in person, I always ask people to share, what do you do to help cope with stress? And I always like to hear what people say because, even though, I'm an adult, we're all adults, we're always building up our coping skills. We can always continue to build up our resiliency. And I like hearing things because sometimes I hear things and I'm just like I hear a lot of times people say they like to clean, that cleaning actually helps them cope with stress. For me, cleaning gives me more stress. But sometimes I hear different ideas that people share and I think to myself, that's actually a really good idea. I think that, as I'm always building up my coping skills, I want to try that out for myself to see if I can add it to my list. So think about what helps you. So we're going to talk about now, how do you actually help someone? So maybe it's a person that you know some risk factors about, some challenging things that are going on in their life, or maybe you don't know anything going on in their life, but you've seen some warning signs, or you've heard some warning signs, or maybe you just have that gut feeling in the pit of your stomach where you just feel like, gosh, I'm not sure this person's okay. I think I want to have a conversation with them and see what's going on. So the first thing you want to do if you're talking to somebody is, obviously, if you're going to be talking face-to-face, you want to be in a quiet place. You don't want it to be too busy of a place. You want to just be able to focus on each other. And if you're face-to-face, you really want to show that person that you're truly listening to them. So eye contact is really important. Having an open posture, you want to be at their level. If somebody's sitting down, you want to be also sitting down, being at their level. And by open posture, I meant sort of like you're not closed off. So I actually like to cross my arms a lot because I think it's comfortable. But if someone's opening up to me, I'm definitely going to try to uncross my arms because that might send a message to them that I don't really want to be there, or I have better things to be doing. Maybe they'll even feel judged by me. So just having an open posture, putting away distractions like phones or computers, anything that might get in the way and inhibit that listening. If you're face-to-face, nodding is good as well. If we're talking for a second about supporting somebody by phone, because that's sort of like other things you can do if you're supporting somebody on the phone, we have this thing we call verbal nodding. So it's basically, I'll give an example right now. I hear you. Things, verbal cues that you are still there, you're still on the phone. Obviously, if someone's talking to you, whether they're in person or on the phone, you want to make sure to be pretty quiet, but it's good to have those verbal nods to show that you are truly there and present and you are listening. The first two things under the don't section here, these ones are kind of tough because I think it's so natural when we're talking with people to want to share our own experiences, especially if we feel like it would really benefit that person to hear about maybe how we handled a similar situation. And I think for some people that can be really nice to hear, but for others, it might make them feel kind of isolated. It might make them feel like the conversation has completely shifted, that suddenly now it's not about them anymore, it's about the other person. So, what I would say is if you're talking to somebody and they're opening up and they're sharing the hard things that they're going through, if you hear something that makes you think, wow, I've been through a similar thing, I think I want to tell them how I dealt with it or help them feel like they're not alone, I'm not going to say you should never share that, but just kind of pump the brakes a little bit, and before you start saying that stuff, just kind of wait it out and keep listening and decide if it's really going to be helpful for them. Because it might not be. Maybe what they just need to do is vent, and that's really what's going to help them feel like, maybe they're going to be okay. It's the same with giving advice. It's so hard not to give advice. But again, that can be really challenging. If I'm going through a really tough time, if I am going to various people in my life looking for support, as in I just want them to listen to me, if every single person is giving me advice and telling me how to fix my problems, I might feel like no one's listening to me. Everyone is telling me how to fix my problems. Everyone seems to know what I should do, except I don't know what I need to do. I might feel like, why should I even go to the people around me? They're just going to give me advice. So it can be really challenging. But again, it's so hard not to give advice. So again, if you're talking to someone and you feel like I know what they can do to solve their problem, just pump the brakes a little bit, see how the conversation goes. You can also ask permission to give advice. You could say to someone, I'm here for you, I'm listening. What would be most helpful for you right now? Do you want any advice? I have one idea. I'm not sure it's going to help, but if you're open to it, I'm willing to share it. But if you don't want any advice right now, that's totally fine. I'm here for you. I'm here to listen. So, really putting it out there and asking if it's okay to even share might be a nice way to do it. So we've got our active listening. And what goes along with listening is obviously asking questions, and specifically asking open-ended questions. And those are really questions that can't be answered with a yes or a no. It's questions that lead to more questions, questions that lead to more conversation. You want to try to avoid interrogation. And I also put up here avoiding why questions. Because sometimes if I ask somebody, why did you do that, or why do you think you're feeling this way, maybe they don't even know how to answer that question. But if I ask why, it seems like I'm really looking for a hard answer. They might not even know. That might stress them out even more. Plus, if I ask them, why this or why that, they might feel like I'm judging them, or like they have to defend themselves or defend their feelings or their actions. So it can get a little bit convoluted sometimes trying to avoid why questions, but I think that can shut down conversation sometimes, so it's just something to be mindful of. And also, we put up here, acknowledge their pain by using their words, kind of mirroring their language. So one thing that I wouldn't do is if I'm talking to someone and they really seem like they're depressed, like everything they're saying, I'm just like, gosh, they sound like they're so depressed. If they're not using the word depressed or depression, I'm not going to use that word because I don't want to label their feelings or what they're going through. So just mirroring their language. Oh, the one thing I just wanted to mention as well about listening, at Samaritans, we sort of have this 80-20 rule. What I mean by that is we try to have the person on the helpline, the volunteer, talking 20% of the time, and the person who's calling in talking 80% of the time, so that they're really leading the conversation. That just kind of aids with the listening. Okay, so let's say that you're talking to someone and everything that they're saying is just seeming really hopeless and really helpless. And again, maybe you're having that feeling, kind of like in the pit of your stomach, like this person just doesn't seem like they're okay. It seems like they're in a really hard place. It's okay to ask the question. It's very straightforward. Are you feeling suicidal? What I like to do is I like to, first off, thank the person for opening up, because it can be so scary to show that vulnerability, to really open up to someone. So I might say to someone, thank you so much for opening up to me. I really appreciate you coming to me. It sounds like you're in so much pain right now. And I want to ask you, are you feeling suicidal? Or do you sometimes feel so bad that you think about suicide? You want to stay as calm as you can. I know it's so much easier said than done to stay calm in a situation like that. But, think about that person who might be in crisis. Their anxiety level, or they might just be like really kind of stressing out because they've shared so much with you. So you want to try to present as calmly as you can. Maybe you're freaking out inside, but you want to really ask that question in a calm way and be ready to support them, whether they answer with a yes or whether they answer with a no. So everything on this slide here, this might be something that you never, ever do. You know, this is sort of like a risk assessment that we do at Samaritans. I wanted to share it in case anybody who's participating in the webinar ever is in a situation where they are going to be asking a lot of specific questions to somebody who is suicidal. But again, this might be something that you never, ever do. You know, if you ask somebody that question, if they're feeling suicidal, if they say yes, you know, you might want to try to find out how much have they thought about this. So what we do with Samaritans is if somebody says yes, we'll say, okay, have you thought about how you might take your life? If they say yes, you know, we'll ask, okay, do you have access to that? If they say yes, we'll find out, okay, have you thought about when you might do this? You know, if they say something like, I'm doing it tonight, I'm doing it right when we get off the phone, like if their time frame is very, very imminent, you know, we're going to try to work with that person to try to keep them safe, which we're going to discuss on the next slide. I do want to say that if you ever ask somebody that question, if they're feeling suicidal, if somebody says no, you know, you don't want to respond with, oh, thank goodness, I'm so glad you're not, or, oh, good, you know, because first of all, it just really builds to the stigma of this whole thing. But also, what if the person is lying? You know, sometimes you might ask someone that question and they say no, and they're lying because we can't control people's words. We can't control what they're going to tell us. I've actually had situations when I was a volunteer in the helpline where I asked somebody if they were feeling suicidal and they told me no, and then we kept talking for a few minutes, and just hearing the things that they were saying made me think, gosh, this person is really in so much pain right now. They're sounding so hopeless. And I said to somebody before, you know I asked you this question before and you told me no, but I'm hearing what you're saying and I'm really worried about you and I want to ask you again, are you having any thoughts of suicide? And I've had a couple situations people actually changed their answer and said, yes, actually I am. So while you might feel very relieved if somebody answers that question as a no, you don't want to sort of shut down the conversation and say, oh, thank goodness. You want to keep listening and keep being there for that person. So for us at Samaritans, and actually for a lot of people that work with those that are suicidal, they often do this thing called safety planning. And it's basically working with a person to try to find a way to keep them safe for some period of time. So if somebody calls into Samaritans and sort of all those questions that we asked on the previous slide, if they have the means in which to take their life, if the time frame is imminent, if it seems like it really is a pretty, you know, imminent risk situation, we try to work with the person to find a way to keep them safe, maybe for an hour, maybe for 2 hours, maybe for the night, and then encourage them to call us back the next day or call us back if they're still feeling suicidal. A safety plan, you know, can look different from person to person. I know a lot of clinicians work with their clients to develop sort of a template, a safety plan template that the person can refer to, that the client can refer to if they are feeling suicidal. So you can take a look here just at the kind of questions that it might ask in a safety plan, and if you're curious what a safety plan might look like, you can go online and find examples and templates that can be filled in. I think at the end of the day, that last question on the end there at the bottom of the slide, what is the one thing that is most important to me and worth living for? You know, for someone who feels like they really are finding very little hope, that's kind of the one question. You know, what is the one thing that you feel can keep you safe? You know, or the one thing that is worth living for. What can we do to keep you safe tonight? But look online if you're interested in what more safety plans can look like. I think these things here are just really important to keep in mind when having these kinds of difficult conversations with people. You are human. We're all human. We're not always going to say the right things. That's fine. It's normal to feel nervous or feel anxiety or feel, you know, fear or any other difficult feelings. If you have, you know, helped someone or talked to somebody who's suicidal, It's important for you to debrief afterwards, to try to process what happened. You do not have to be the expert or have all the answers. And, keeping in mind that you're not alone. There are others around that can support you. So again, I know I mentioned before staying calm, how it's much easier said than done, but really keeping that in mind I think is important. This third bullet point here is really crucial. If someone's life is at risk, that's too big of a risk to keep to yourself, even if that person you're talking to believes that the information they're sharing is confidential. I go to a lot of schools and I talk to kids about this stuff, and, kids tell each other secrets all the time and they swear them to secrecy. And, they say, if you tell anyone this, our friendship's over. That's what kids do. And what I always tell kids is, you have to tell an adult, you have to tell somebody if a friend shares that they're suicidal. And at the end of the day, you would rather have a friend who's alive and who's mad at you than a friend who's gone. And while I say that to kids, I think it's really important for adults, for all of us, to also keep that in mind. If somebody shares that with us, that's too much to carry on our shoulders. We have to go get some help. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. So who can you turn to? I think all of us, or all of you, are probably coming from different places. Some workplaces have protocols in place if somebody's suicidal. If it's not in a workplace, alerting family or friends. And it's obviously not about trying to spread rumors or anything like that. It's about trying to get that person help. Calling a counselor or therapist, calling 911 or some other local resource, not feeling bad about calling 911 or calling one of those resources. I know here in Boston, we have some great resources. Instead of calling the police, like we have a group of, they're like the Boston Emergency Services Team. They provide psychiatric evaluations. I think a lot of places do have those kinds of resources. So if you're curious what might be available in your area, I definitely encourage you to look online to see what kinds of psychiatric services might be available if somebody's in a crisis. Calling or reaching out to Samaritans. And also, you could reach out to us if you're trying to support somebody else. Like if you need support in how to support somebody who is suicidal, we get a lot of calls and texts from people who are looking for some support, some resources, and how they can be a better help to someone. So that's another way that you could utilize us. There's a few resources here. I know I've been spouting the Samaritans Helpline a lot, but in addition, there's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. What I want to specifically mention about them is that if there's somebody who they don't speak English or English is not their first language, well, I don't have a list of languages they provide in front of me. They have a lot of different languages that they can provide translation for and services for. So that's a really good resource to know about, as well as SAMHSA down here at the bottom. I'm just going to keep that up for a second in case anybody is hoping to write down some of those phone numbers. Okay. The last thing I just want to say is that we all have limitations on how much we can do. We can really only control our own actions. We can't control the actions of other people. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, we can't prevent every suicide. But I think that all of us are really, capable of talking to somebody, helping somebody, trying to help that person get the support that they need. But like I said, we all have limitations, and we kind of have to be okay with that, which it can be really hard to do. It can be really hard to think about the fact that maybe we can't prevent every suicide, but we're only human. We can only control our own actions. That's why it's important. I think it's important to think about our own limitations that we have, and our own safety and our own well-being that has to come into play if we are supporting somebody who is suicidal. I really encourage using our helpline for yourself, for people that you're supporting, again, for yourself if you're looking for support and how to help another person. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have a lot more information on our website as well. So I think with that, oops, that just went away. Sorry about that, folks. I'm going to transfer it back to Carla.
Great. And while you do that, Rose, of course, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to share your expertise with the NeedyMeds audience, and also to the audience for taking time out of their busy days to learn a bit more about Samaritans. I've had the privilege of getting to know Samaritans through our partnership at NeedyMeds, and it's always not only sobering topic, and the statistics are so sobering in and of themselves, but it's such an important topic that we all just be more aware of. I'll remind people that if you do have any questions, you can type them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel, which is should be up on your screen. I do see some questions coming in. While we wait for others to come in, of course, there is the contact information for Samaritans. Rose, if there's something that looks incorrect, let me know up there. And I will stress again, certainly Rose's contact information is in there, and we will do our best to answer all your questions that you have today. But don't forget that if you or someone you know is in crisis at the moment, don't hesitate to, of course, visit their website, but also call their toll-free helpline, which is 877-870-HOPE or 877-870-4673. I also put copies of our PowerPoint presentations on the registration, so you would have been able to download them. Sometimes people have difficulty with that, so don't hesitate to shoot me a message or send me an email if you'd like me to send you copies of today's presentations. With that, before we wrap up, I'm going to go ahead and pose some questions to Rose that are coming in. The first one is, what do you do if someone is constantly saying things like they want to die, but it's more because of old age, and they're saying things like, I've done everything I want to do, I've done everything I want to see. How is that addressed?
That's a really good question. You can still hear me, right?
Coming in loud and clear.
Okay, great. That's a really, really good question. It's a hard one. And I think that sometimes that can also play into the warning sign we discussed. It's not that it's a joke, but that it can play in where somebody might sort of casually say, "Oh, yeah, like you said, Carla, I want to do everything that I've seen, that I've done. What's the point anymore?" I think people absolutely have a right to say that and to feel that. I would still take it seriously. I would still check in with them and ask them what they meant by that. If someone says, I've seen everything I want to see, I've seen everything I want to see, I've done everything I want to do, I would still check in with them and say, it sounds like, you've had a very full life, you've seen a lot, you've done a lot of things. Can you tell me more about what you're saying and what you're thinking? And if it's worrying you, you could say, I hear what you're saying, and I want to just ask you, have you been having thoughts of suicide? So I would still take it seriously. I would still check in with that person to see where they're at and how they're doing emotionally.
Right, and I think that's something that I certainly take away from this presentation, that, as you had so succinctly put, it's better to just privately ask somebody, is this serious? How are you feeling? Than it is to let it go. Another question, Rose, is there a separate line for the youth population to call in, or does everybody just call the 1-877-870-HOPE?
So that's a great question. We did used to have a separate line, but we don't anymore. It's really, if you call in or text in, we accept, whatever the population is, whether it's teens or elders or whoever, it's the same number. I think one of the reasons that we may have gotten rid of it is because we're just volunteer-based, it's really hard to know who's going to be in the office at what time. So our volunteers are so capable of really helping anybody, no matter what their age is or what they're going through. But no, we do not have a specific line just for teens.
Great, and thank you for the question and also the explanation, Rose. And I think it makes it easier for those of us that want to help spread the word about a resource such as Samaritans, that we know that we just have the one toll-free helpline that's easy to remember, 877-870-HOPE, so that we can make sure that we're not sending somebody to a resource that may not be applicable to them. We have somebody else, Rose, that's asking, if we have a population of workers that may be interested, professionals, in providing suicide prevention services, does Samaritans offer certificate opportunities or something like that?
Like if they were going to receive a suicide prevention workshop?
That's right. That's right. Now, I know I can speak on behalf of NeedyMeds. We don't offer, for example, completing a webinar. We don't offer a certificate of training or completion for the webinar, but we will certainly provide you with an email letting you know you completed, you did participate in a webinar. And I'm guessing, Rose, but correct me if I'm wrong, that Samaritans doesn't offer separate training as takeaway so that the suicide prevention trainings can be done elsewhere. It would be just your volunteer training, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we generally don't do certificates. I believe there is something we can provide if people want to get CEUs from one of our trainings, but we don't really offer certificates, beyond like what you said, Carla. If someone is actually becoming a Samaritans volunteer and going through that entire training to become a volunteer, then I think you do get some kind of certificate, but not really for the workshops that I do.
Got it. I didn't think so, and somebody actually else had asked me that, and one of our audience members brought it up, so that's really helpful. Here's an interesting question, more of an observation. Somebody's saying that they've noticed people in the mental health field are sometimes depressed, and whether or not there's any statistics about that.
You know, I don't have any specific statistics, so that is definitely an accurate observation. I mean, I think that there's so much burnout for people that are working in the mental health field, as well as people that are like medical doctors, police officers, first responders, lawyers. Like, there's a lot of populations that are at a higher risk. Unfortunately, I don't know any statistics, but you know, I think it's really hard for a lot of people in the mental health field, because they're helping people that are in crises a lot of the time, who are struggling so much, and they're not, and they take a lot on, and they're not always, able to take care of themselves as much as they probably can or they should, or, even though we all have the best of intentions, it can be so hard to balance everything. But I think that is a good observation, and I think that's absolutely true. But yeah, I don't have any specific numbers, unfortunately.
No, but I think, thank you for addressing that, and I think that's actually a good way to wrap up the webinar, is to drive home the point that Rose had made, that certainly their website and the toll-free hotline is, of course, for people who may be experiencing suicidal thoughts and who are in crisis at the moment, but it's also important to remember that it's a good resource for those that want to support people in those moments of crisis. So that's an important distinction. I do want to, once again, we have one final question actually, which is great. If there is somebody interested in becoming a volunteer for Samaritans, how would they go about that, Rose?
That's a great question. We always need volunteers. I cannot stress how much we always need volunteers. So I know that up on the screen there is our website, SamaritansHope.org. If you go there, I don't have it right in front of me, but one of the tabs is, how to get involved, and there's a link for how to become a volunteer. And basically what you do is just go there, fill in the information. Somebody from our office will get in touch with you. It would involve you coming in for an information session and then interviewing, and then, seeing if it's a good fit on both sides. So, as I mentioned before, I'm a former volunteer. It's an incredible experience. I learned so much and how to listen to people, be there for the people in my own life, and we always need volunteers. And I think, yeah, so go to the website, and it should be really easy to find. And I'm sure if you're having trouble, reach out to NeedyMeds, reach out to Carla, and she can put you in touch with me.
Absolutely, and you can certainly send me a separate email if you have difficulty finding it or if there's something else you're interested in. And with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap up today's presentation. I will let everybody know that, as I had mentioned in the beginning, this webinar is being recorded. We will convert it into a video and get it up on the NeedyMeds YouTube page. And you can find that on the NeedyMeds homepage on the top right-hand corner of the website. You'll see a whole bunch of links that will have a link to our social media sites, and there's also a button that will bring you directly to our YouTube channel, so you can check it out. And I would also encourage everybody to check out our YouTube channel anyway, because we do record most of our special topic webinars, and you may find other resources that are helpful to you. So again, if you haven't received a copy or had difficulty downloading the attached PowerPoint presentations, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to learn about this really important resource. And Rose, thank you so much for this thorough and very important presentation. Everybody have a good rest of the day and take care of yourselves. Take care, Rose. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.